I think rather than introduce our after-dinner speaker, whose biography you all know well, I'm going to read you late breaking news. This was appeared on April 1, 2008 on Google. Virgil. Good morning, Silicon Valley. Google joins forces with Virgin's Sir Richard Branson to announce Virgil, a plan to establish a Mars colony that, considering their respective ambitions, doesn't seem all that much of a stretch. Earth has issues, and it's time humanity got started on Plan B. So starting in 2014, Virgin founder Richard Branson and Google co-founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin will be leading hundreds of users on one of the grandest adventures of human history, Project Virgil, I assume that's how I pronounce it, the first permanent human colony on Mars. Apply to be Virgil Pioneer at www.google.com/Virgil. Please welcome an entrepreneur, a social investor, a philanthropist, and a soon-to-be Martian, Richard Branson. Wasn't Annie Lennox wonderful?
Absolutely wonderful. She always is. Hi, Annie.
Richard, you've said that we should treat HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis and malaria like a war, that we should, in essence, establish a war room. Tell me what you've done in this area.
Well, the word war room came from a waiter that used to work at a game reserve we had in Africa. About 7 or 8 years ago, he died of AIDS, and he left a very moving poem, which I read, and he talked about AIDS is not a disease, but it is a war that is on Africa, and he was very angry with his government. For not realizing that it was a war, it was on Africa, and so because of his death, we pledged that we would lose nobody ever again at any Virgin company, and we introduced something called the zero campaign, and the zero campaign was that we would try to make sure that none of our staff died of AIDS or ever went from HIV to AIDS, that none of our staff would transmit HIV to their children, and that none of our staff who were not HIV positive would become HIV positive. And we launched a very big campaign, and then tried to get other companies to do the same. And in the process, I also was at the 46664 concert and remember Madiba's words very clearly. And subsequently, about a year later, Bill Gates was going to see Thabo Mbeki, and he'd been very frustrated the time before because he'd offered 50 million to help South Africa and it had been turned down. And I contacted the deputy president and said, please tell Thabo, he's just got to welcome Bill Gates, and it'd be just so sad and so foolish if he turns him down again. And I got a message back saying that Thabo Mbeki says, don't worry, I'm going to be a good boy and everything's going to be fine. And
he said, be a good boy to you?
No, he said he's going to be a good boy.
Oh, all right. What was he thinking?
Anyway, I got a call from Bill Gates the next day saying that he'd turned the money down yet again, and this was money that was desperately needed. And then the following week, I did an interview in a South African paper where I used this, the same words that Mandela had used, and said, that it was genocide on their own people, and how sad that the African government will become known for genocide of their own people and the deaths of millions of their own people, rather than the brilliant things that they've done with, by bringing peace to the country, by forgiving the white man for everything that it did to the country. And to give Thabo Mbeki credit, the next day I was in Namibia, and he sent a 7-page letter, handwritten, explaining as best he could why he'd taken the attitude they had, talking about, that there are a lot of other priorities about, the health of the people, how the people had been so badly treated by white hospitals and so on and so on. And then at the end of the letter, just said, well, what is it you want us to do? What can we do? And so we sat down and tried to think, what positive, what is there something that's really positive could come out of the last year or two of his time in tenure, and suggested to him that what South Africa needed was effectively a war room to really tackle these problems head on. In America, you have a center for disease control. In sub-Saharan Africa, you have nothing like that. So we went back to him and suggested that we should help him set up a war room so that the ANC can do something extremely positive, make sure that people in the future get their antiretroviral drugs, that malaria is tackled head on, that there's a very worrying new strain of TB that the war room could have picked that up much more quickly, and so we're now working. We've got the complete blessing of his government. As importantly, we've got the blessing of the new government that's coming into power.
You have a deep love for Africa, a deep commitment to South Africa in particular, but also elsewhere. What was your first introduction?
The awful lavatories at the airport. White only, black only lavatories. The ghastly Afrikaner customs officers as you came through. I mean, first impressions were not altogether good when I first went there as a teenager. The thing that really shook me up, a bit like Annie, was visiting the hospitals, and the hospitals in open inverted commas, which were basically just places where people went to die, and just rows and rows of dying people, and then the waiting rooms just full of people who were waiting to go into the beds of the people who died the night before, and no antiretroviral drugs, no testing, nothing. I mean, that was going back 4 or 5 years. Things have improved. They've still got a long way to go.
You have made a commitment. We've focused for the last 2 days a bit on human rights issues and on conflict. And you and Peter Gabriel came up with the notion of an organization called the Elders. Why don't you tell us a little bit about its origins and what you each had in mind?
I think Peter will tomorrow morning, I'm sure, explain where he was coming from as far as the Elders is concerned, and I think the good thing is it was a marriage of ideas. My principal interest for the Elders was on the conflict resolution side, on the basis that if you don't have peace in the country, nothing else can exist. Education falls apart. The hospitals fall apart. Tourism falls apart. Everything falls apart. And so, if one could get the 12 people in the world who the world could see that were the right candidates with the greatest moral authority in the world, the greatest who had the greatest respect of the global community, hopefully reasonably well gender-based and reasonably well geographically based as well, that those people would have the chance of moving in and resolving conflict. And Nelson Mandela, again, who Annie earlier spoke about, I think most people in the world will say would, is the person they look up to most. He agreed to be the founding elder, and his wife, Grasham Michelle. And it's been a tremendous honor for us to have attended the meetings of the elders over the last 18 months. It's been wonderful having you helping us look after the elders, and we've had some incredible founders many of whom are in the audience, who've helped pull the whole project together. I think Kenya recently was an example of what the elders can achieve. I mean, two of the elders, Kofi Annan and Grasham Michelle, went there when Kenya looked like it was falling apart, and you had the leader of the opposition believing that the ruling party had cheated in the elections. And very quickly, you had 600,000 displaced people, 1,000 people killed by machetes, the potential of a very stable country completely turning into Rwanda or a civil war. And 5 weeks of Kofi and Grasha, getting them into a game reserve and saying they shouldn't leave until they reached agreement, brought about peace. Now, now it's up to those leaders not to become selfish and let that whole peace agreement fall apart. But we have to hope that it doesn't happen. But I think these elders have got such gravitas that leaders have to listen to them and see them.
But in a case like that, it's really, I guess, has to be a long-term commitment by the elders, because it has to be shored up.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Mary yesterday talked about the visit of the elders. Mary Robinson, who was one of the elders, talked about the visit to Darfur, and Randy, who's one of the founders, who's here today, just saying it's absolutely essential that the elders go back there soon, and they've got to keep going back there until Darfur goes off the. Well, it's already out of the news, sadly, but till it goes out of the news for the right reasons, and that North and South Sudan have sorted out their differences, and Darfur's peaceful once again.
But there's a situation where the international community has tried in fits and starts to meet its responsibility to protect by sending in a United Nations and African Union force. But they lack 8 Black Hawk helicopters, for example, and the African Union lacks capacity quite generally. Have the elders pressed the US government for help on those helicopters, and can we afford to take no for an answer?
The elders certainly have, and when we were in Darfur, we met this wonderful Nigerian general who was overseeing the African force, and I think Darfur was extremely lucky to have a man of his capability in charge, but he's got men, but he has not got the resources to do the job properly. And when we came back, the elders talked to Gordon Brown and 1 or 2 other leaders to try to get more support. I think in that area they haven't been as successful as they could have been, and more work needs to be done.
Here's a situation where a new norm, the responsibility to protect, was embraced by the UN member states 2 years ago. A new norm is being tested. If we fail that test this time around, is it more consequential than even that one country? Could it possibly challenge a whole new understanding of our respective roles and responsibilities?
I think that if Sudan falls apart, you know, that whole region could fall apart. And that's why these interventions are just so critical. You know, if you talk, you know, if you have a situation with, you know, President Bashir of North Sudan and President Kiir of South Sudan, you know, they could be an absolute loggerheads, and actually having individuals come in who really are dispassionate and have got, you know, nothing to gain. You know, they're maybe in their last 10, 15 years of their life, that, you know, they hopefully put ego behind them.
Don't say that about Mary.
Or Mary's our young elder, youngest elder. But you know, you know, they're all there, all 12 of them for the right reasons. I think, you know, it is possible that they can persuade. I mean, they had words with President Kiir and suggested that he rejoin, you know, the Bashir government rather than having a split, and he has rejoined the government. You know, they're pushing to get election monitors in, maybe through the Carter Center to oversee the elections. It looks likely that that's going to be accepted, to avoid a situation that happened in Kenya, where you know, where if people don't trust an election, things can go horribly wrong.
I'm trying to, the people who Richard went on this trip, and it was led by Archbishop Tutu and Jimmy Carter, who was on it, and he knows President Bashir, and so was able to have those conversations. Lakhdar Brahimi, the former foreign minister of Algiers, Grassa Machel, and who might
They were the four elders, yeah.
Okay, I'm not leaving
Incredible group of people, and as everybody here, I think, had a taste of spending time with Archbishop Tutu yesterday. You know, just you know, anyway, what incredible people. What great sense of humor, great, you know, I mean, you can see why these presidents have to listen to these people, and they're quite willing to give some tough talk. I mean, you know, Grassa Machel, you know, spoke with both presidents, you know, and just said, look, you know, if you let these countries go back into war again, you know, history will not forgive you for it, and they need to be told that. I mean, war is an easy option, but easy to fall into war, very incredibly difficult to get out of it. And having brought about peace after years and years of war, they just can't let it happen again. And I think the elders can really help in situations like that.
Mm-hmm. And Grassa also reached out to the women's organizations and to women who had been victims.
Well, African women shouldn't be biased against men, but African women, you know, women have children often, and therefore they've got a bigger vested interest perhaps than the men to make sure that conflict doesn't take place, and so it makes sense often to go to the women and you know, the women are, I think, you know, have a more powerful role to play in avoiding conflict sometimes than men.
Now, I keep focusing on Africa in part because you were just in Sudan, and because Kofi and Grassa were in Kenya, but the elders are also focused on Burma, on Myanmar as well, and on other trouble spots. But there's less opportunity for movement there. Is that fair to say?
It's an extremely difficult issue. You know, I think you know, Peter may talk a bit more about it tomorrow. I mean, we've had, you know, different ideas for ways of campaigning there. You know, one idea is on an anniversary of the monks being massacred, to have, you know, a global campaign where people, you know, paint everything orange, or paint their doors orange, or their houses orange, or they wear orange clothes. You know, that you know, I mean, they definitely shouldn't be forgotten. And you know, we try to keep an open dialogue with the Chinese rather than, you know, shutting off discussion with the Chinese, and the elders trying to keep an open dialogue with the Chinese rather than discuss, shutting off discussion with the Chinese. China's going to play a bigger and bigger role in the world, and I think that's important. Having said that, Archbishop Tutu, in his own capacity as an individual, obviously yesterday spoke out very strongly about the Olympics, and so I'm not sure that he's going to be welcome as an elder in China for a while.
Yeah, well, I think similarly, he's not terribly welcomed by Robert Mugabe.
Say again?
Who, he's similarly in Zimbabwe. No. I think Archbishop Tutu has offered the advice that Robert Mugabe stepped down on multiple occasions. And Robert Mugabe's response is, "I'm not taking advice from the tiny purple priest."
So I think that, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that, yeah, I mean, the elders as individuals will have individual thoughts. I mean, you've seen this happening, and they'll put out their individual statements, which is absolutely right. They should continue to be individuals. But the idea of the elders was that these incredible people that collectively, the power of 12 is better than just 12 individuals. It's much stronger, and as much as possible, I think the elders should try to work together as elders, as a group, because I think they will achieve more that way. But equally, it's actually refreshing to give them freedom of speech.
That's awfully good. I probably should say who they are. You'll catch me up. It's Nelson Mandela, it's Graça Machel, it's Archbishop Tutu, it's Jimmy Carter, it's Lakhdar Brahimi, Mary Robinson, Gru Harlem Brundtland, this is a test, Ilaban Bad, okay, now I'm losing steam in here. Mary, help me, Mohamed Yunus, and President Cardoso.
And Nelson Mandela and Graça Machel, yeah. Very good.
I win the test.
No.
So let me, I raise this because I'm talking to you a bit about the elders in part because we have couched this as a conversation between...
I could be doing this interview with you, and you'd be having... anyway, carry on.
Well, we'll do that. We'll switch seats midway through. What has been so extraordinary to me has been, I'll answer the question. What's striking is that these are individuals who are independent of governments, independent of any financial obligations, but most importantly, they're independent of any concerns about personal legacy. They're not trying to write their history. And in that sense, they're truly free. And I wonder if that's not a lesson to others of us who aren't, aren't of that stature, but the importance of being truly free and therefore independent and able to listen openly and speak truthfully. So I applaud you for this idea.
The power of listening, I think we maybe put above everything else, and they're all very good listeners.
Yeah, yeah. Except Jimmy Carter wasn't very nice to a guard in Sudan. He was rather cross. Can you tell us about that?
Well, we were in the street, and he wanted to talk to Darfurians who had been displaced, and the only people who were put up to talk to the elders were people who'd actually lived in this region for generations, and they were refusing to let us see them. So he wasn't going to take no for an answer. And there was a machine gun or two that was levied in his direction, and at that time I thought maybe I should try to intervene and let it get a little bit of peace and calm and compromising going on. But anyway, he got his way, and we saw the Darfurians, and as best they could, they talked about their plight. But I mean, every other man there, I'm afraid, was a plainclothes And so they were pretty frightened of talking. So there was a danger of us putting these people in peril if we pushed the point too hard, I think.
Now, you're a businessman. You've devoted your life. You're an entrepreneur. You've devoted your life to that. What are the qualities of an entrepreneur that are required in order to make social change happen? I mean, obviously, you've taken your skills in one area and applied them in the social sphere. What are the characteristics for the rest of us to gain from?
Well, first, I think you need to realize that in business, you've got people who are good entrepreneurs and you've got people who are good managers. And I think I fall more into the first category than the second category. I'm good at seeing where there's a need, where there's a gap in the marketplace, and perhaps getting in there and filling that gap, and then finding great people to manage and run those businesses. And in the social sector, again, I can perhaps see where, in Africa, you've got 100,000 different organizations doing wonderful works in Africa. But there's no organization that's pulling them together or looking for best practices or mapping out where all the problems are, or alerting to people when new diseases break out and so on. And so as an entrepreneur, I can see there's an obvious need, and I can perhaps get in there and get an organization set up. As to running it on a day-to-day basis, then I'd have to find other people, who could do that.
What is the importance, you just met with the social entrepreneurs, and what is the importance of being willing to take risks, being willing to be very bold, and being willing to fail, and then pick yourself up again and start over?
I don't think there's any difference between being a social entrepreneur and being a business entrepreneur, in that I think the people who are the best entrepreneurs are people who say yes rather than no. People who are great at motivating people, who love people, who look for the best in people, who get the best people around them, who are good at praising people, and certainly people are willing to fall flat on their face and fail, but learn from their failures and pick themselves up and move forward again. And as an adventurer entrepreneur, I've had plenty of failures.
I was going to say, what's your biggest flop?
It was splashing in the water many occasions in hot air balloons, I suspect, was my most dramatic flops. But
did they tend to have the Virgin brand right on them?
Fortunately, the brand still stuck outside the water when the helicopters came to pick me up.
But how good is that in advancing a brand of an airline?
I remember when we first attempted the Atlantic in a balloon, and we were rescued by helicopter in the North Sea, and the next day our Virgin Atlantic took a full-page ad just saying, "Next time, Richard, take the plane."
Now, you have decided to make a very big commitment to combating climate change, and climate is also linked, sadly, to conflict. And you think, what will happen to Bangladesh, and what will happen to low-lying states? You got a lot of attention for investing in biofuels, but since then, you had a meeting on Necker, on your island, in the British Virgins, with a group of high technology entrepreneurs and others to talk about new solutions to climate change. What did you come up with in the end? What was the outcome of that?
It's actually, I think, what we came up with was not that dissimilar to what we're looking at in Africa with the environmental war room, and that is to actually have a global environmental, I don't know why I like the word war room, but anyway, war room again, because there are all these, I mean, the enemy is carbon in this case. Carbon is ultimately going to kill mankind. It's going to, may not kill all mankind, but it's going to, kill billions of people on the earth. It's going to, write off most of the species on Earth. It's going to, it's going to be incredibly destructive. So it is a war. Now, if we had effectively World War I and World War II breaking out or around us, we would have the generals. They would have their bunkers. They would, be mapping out how to deal with the enemy. They'd be collecting all the ideas. They'd be, prioritizing where to turn the forces. They'd be working out, which funds could be best spent to deal with the problem. There are commercial ideas, which, particularly places like San Francisco, people will just be getting on and doing. But there are a lot of ideas which are not going to necessarily make a lot of money, but can actually, deal with the carbon problem maybe even more effectively. I mean, what's the most cost-effective way of saving the rainforest? What's the, are there any ways in which we can extract carbon out of the Earth's atmosphere? If people have come up with ideas to do that, what's the most effective ways, and so on. So anyway, that was the idea that we came out with, and that's something we're developing now.
But you've come up with a prize, haven't you, for someone who comes up with the best idea for extracting carbon from the atmosphere? Is that right?
Yes, I mean, we have a $25 million prize for anybody who can extract a certain quantity of carbon out of the Earth's atmosphere. Obviously, if somebody could win that prize, then the problem, is sorted out, because we could then regulate the Earth's temperature. If the Earth starts to get too hot, we can take carbon out. If the Earth starts to cool, which we certainly know how to sort that problem out, we just drive a lot more cars and planes, and we deal with it that way. So obviously, more people who can, more technicians and scientists who can try to win that prize, the better.
So I'm going to just ask you 3 more questions, then I'm going to turn. Do we have mics so we can do questions from the audience? Virgin trains, what are they running on? What have you done with your diesel trains?
They're running on partly biofuel, partly diesel. They have regenerative brakes, so every time they brake, they send power down the power line. Obviously they're cleaner than the plane, but they're not perfect yet.
What about Virgin Galactic?
Virgin Galactic is actually pretty good. I mean, we'll be able to send somebody to space for the same carbon output as a economy class between San Francisco and New York. So we're actually have got that under control. We may even be able to be completely carbon neutral by the time we fly in 18 months' time. And by the way, Virgin Galactic isn't an April Fool's, that's real.
That it wasn't, it just happened to have come out on April 1?
What's that?
Oh, Virgin Galactic isn't April Fool's. And so who are going to be the first passengers?
Well, all going well. My dad, who's 90 years old tomorrow, my mother, who's 88, and my 2 children, who's 21 and 24.
So Joan is smart enough to stay.
My wife has decided that she wants to keep her feet firmly on the ground. Yeah. And
having been swept off her feet.
And Bert Rutan, who's the genius behind the spaceship, is also certainly coming up as well.
I mean, I've been lucky enough to have spent some time, thanks to Richard, involved with the elders. And the most striking thing about this group of men and women, plus the group of men and women who chose to support them, is that they really do place listening above all else. And so, for those reasons, your words tonight are as valuable to Richard as the fun of the conversation. And so we appreciate that so much. And mostly, Richard, I have to say, you are bodacious. When you decide you're going to take on all of civil conflict while you're mitigating climate change and combating AIDS, I say thank God for you. Thank heavens for people like you who make these kinds of commitments boldly and taking huge risks at the time, but knowing.
Yeah, if I may, just before we finish this, Jane is actually in a part-time role, apart from running all this, also been managing. I don't think elders can be managed, but she's been anyway steering it beautifully in their early birth. So just want to say thank you very, very much, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.